Hello and welcome to the Patty Pod, Season 4, Episode 4. How is everyone? I hope everyone's well. I got a touch of a cold, so bear with me, but I think we're going to still have a wonderful Patty Pod. Hope we're doing well. It's Sunday, April 12th. Lots going on in the world, of course. Not a ton going on with me. I'm thinking about some things. Moving in some directions in the job front. I'll update you all more. I've been substitute teaching, and I have finished my novella. I think I mentioned that I was writing the novella last time, or in a previous episode, but I have finished. I'm happy with it. It was really a great experience to write it. I read a couple of books on writing, sort of as I was just getting started, and one of them was by Stephen King, and he described writing, or maybe the creative process at large, is like unearthing a giant fossil that you sort of have to push and kind of strain at points, but at other times you have to just get a little fine brush and kind of brush delicate parts free of soot or soil. And I like that image. It reminded me of what has been attributed to Michelangelo when he talked about not carving statues or carving angels, but freeing the angels from the block of marble. I've always loved that metaphor, and I try to take that approach. So in any case, if you're a fan of the podcast, I strongly recommend checking out the book. You can get it on Amazon. If you just search for The Podcaster, or maybe The Podcaster Book, or The Podcaster by Patrick Brooks, you should be able to get it. I'm going to put a link in the episode description. Hopefully that gets hyperlinked so it'll be easier, or you could just probably copy and paste it. But yeah, check it out. It's the story of Carl, who has the Carl cast. Sound familiar? And he's a Brooklynite. Obviously, there's a lot of parallels with my life, but I think it's a little bit zanier. Well, it definitely is zanier than my life, and I think it's funny, hopefully funny. I've had pretty good feedback from a number of friends who have read it, and I think I've gotten some feedback that it gives a nice sense of New York, that New York is a bit of a character in the story, and paced pretty well. It's pretty lighthearted, I think. So if you like the podcast, I think you'll like The Podcaster. Check it out on Amazon. I'm trying to promote all of my creative work even more than I have in the past. So I will make a plea to the listeners, you listeners out there. If you are enjoying the podcast, please share it with somebody. Just one person who you think might like it. We all know by now the things that I talk about, a little bit of humor, it's a little bit of kind of almost like stand-up. We talk about things with language that I think are interesting. We talk about things with fashion that I think are interesting. Life in New York City. I also, we do a little bit of spirituality. Talk about the adventures that I have, the misadventures that I have. Talk about my takes on things. If you think somebody might like it, please share it with them. I know many of you loyal listeners have shared already, but hey, share again. Share and share again. You'd be helping me out so much. I would appreciate it. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, if you could leave a quick review at the platform that you listen to this on, that would be awesome. Even just one sentence. Fun listen, good point, something like that. Whatever you think, whatever stands out to you, whatever you think is great, that would be really helpful. So that's my ask for you. We're going to try to grow the audience as much as we can, and check out the Podcaster book. But let's get into the episode. Let me just talk a little bit more about the book. I'll give you a little bit more of an overview. So if those of you that are interested, you can check it out. It's about a podcaster who lives in Brooklyn. He really, really wants to get his podcast to be a big success. and he is willing to do some crazy stuff in order to do so. I'll read the backboard kind of sums it up. Carl will do almost anything to make his podcast successful. The question is, can he live with himself? Pushing the envelope, he considers all sorts of wild antics, such as blackmail, badgering, flirtation, and even mimicking a famous movie scene. So, there you go. Hope that piques your interest. Let's get into the episode. I've been following the Artemis II mission, which was the first humaned missioned space mission towards the moon, near the moon, to the moon, in many, many years, since the 70s, since the Apollo missions of the late 60s and early 70s, I think since 1972. These astronauts did not go on the moon, they did not land on the moon, but they came within, I think, 4,000 miles. They got quite close. They went around the dark side of the moon. I kind of reconfirmed that the moon only shows basically one side to us because it turns as it's orbiting. So it's kind of like one face is always shown to us, one side, because it's turning as it's going around us. So we don't get, we see a little bit of the dark side, or the far side, I should say, but we don't really get a good look at it. We hadn't had kind of any look at it until I think the Soviets got some photos before the Apollo astronauts landed on the moon and were able to go to that side. So this was the first time that we've had an up-close look, that humans have had an up-close look since the 70s. They saw things that they hadn't seen before from previous imagery. They took a ton of photos, the astronauts. They're going to be sending a lot of that back. They've sent a lot back already. But I thought it was fascinating, the things that I saw. They did take a photo of the Earth, and it reminded me of the famous Earthrise photo. And what really stood out to me, though, was these astronauts, who are very highly motivated people. Obviously, if you're going to be an astronaut, you have to be super trained and pretty ambitious. And they're fairly scientific. You know, all of them are conducting a number of scientific studies while they're there. And you wouldn't have maybe known that from the way they spoke. They all experienced what seemed to me to be the overview effect, something I've read about before. And the overview effect many astronauts have experienced when they get away from the Earth and they get out into space and they see the Earth from such a distance and they realize that the Earth is just, they called it small Earth, these astronauts. They see it as just this tiny little thing, the further away they get, of course. And they realize it's just this tiny ball floating in space. It's an oasis, is how one of the astronauts described it today or recently. And, Carl Sagan, the famous cosmologist and physicist who sort of popularized a lot of space education in the 20th century, he described it as I think the pale blue dot is all it looks like from a great distance. And these astronauts, they realize, oh my God, this isn't just some place that you can take for granted. It's this tiny oasis in this vast, vast, vast sea of nothingness that is the universe, mostly empty space. And so these astronauts just talked, they had this enormous love for the Earth and this tremendous feeling that it's of its specialness, of its uniqueness. And they talked a lot about how you really get a sense that we are one crew, is how one astronaut put it. It's more than a team, that humanity is together in this. We need to support each other, and they use the word love over and over. All of these astronauts, these kind of seemingly, masculine men. There were 3 men and 1 woman, scientists. You would think they were kind of rational, maybe hard-headed. Talked about love over and over and over. The love they had for each other, the love that they had for humanity, the love that they had for our planet, how important love is, and how we need to see ourselves as a kind of if not one, then as one species and one crew, as the one woman put it, and learn to love each other and learn to love ourselves more. So that was a great moment. again, I was sort of surprised by that. I think maybe some of the other public were surprised by the reaction that they had from being such a kind of a science-focused effort. So that was a little bit about the overview effect and the Artemis 2 mission. It's cool to watch it. A bunch of stuff on YouTube if you want to check it out. Seeing the Earth they took, some of these Earthrise photos. It's cool to see. All right, we'll get into going from Artemis 2. We'll talk about another true story. I was watching Jeopardy the other day. There was a clue. There was something about an author's name that sounded like a body part. And I kid you not, one of the contestants mistakenly guessed Balzac. That wasn't the correct answer, but I was really glad. 14-year-old me would have been very glad that contestant went ahead and gave that as a guess. Balzac. I realized the other day that I'm a personal growth guru's dream when I speak Spanish. I can't use the past or the future tense at all. So when I hablo español, I really am 100% in the moment, in the present. I was listening to Wagner the other day when I stumbled across his famous wedding march. Bum, bum, ba, bum, 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 ba, bum. I was curious what the German lyrics meant, so I prompted ChatGPT to tell me. First of all, ChatGPT came back with a message stating, "Here's a list of websites to explore," and then it gave a list. I was outraged. "That's your job," I yelled at it. So here I am, a couple of years into using this miracle of a technology that can do the work of reading through an innumerable number of sources and then write me little reports. And I'm furious when it tells me I have to go back to the old way in just this one case. In any case, I switched to Google Gemini to get the lyrics, and they are as follows. "Faithfully guided, go forth, where the blessing of love shall preserve you. Victorious courage, love's reward, unites you in faithfulness so true. Champion of virtue, step forward, receive now the crown of love's blooming reward. Hail, 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 hail." What an absolutely lovely meditation on the power of love and its ennobling virtues, don't you think? Well, I certainly thought so. And then I immediately thought back to finding an AI finding I got earlier that mentioned that the lyrics are often that mentioned what lyrics are often substituted when the march is played in English, in the English-speaking world. To wit, here comes the bride, all dressed in white, walking beside in the bright light, with her head bowed and her heart trembling. Oh, look at the bride. Here comes the bride. WTF, let's all gawk at the trembling bride. This is what the English-speaking world turns those gorgeous words into. And even better, when I first read the tune, all I could think about, of course, was the children's rhyme I learned as a kid. Here comes the bride, so fat and wide. Then and now, when I hear those words, all I can think about is Miss Piggy. Great work, English-speaking world. Hey, a little while back, I talked about gritty New York in regards to a train station, a subway station. Well, I've got more great news on that front. I was at the Bergen stop in Cobble Hill, another very desirable neighborhood, and I walked in and I saw a pile of scattered feces on the platform. I then looked up and saw on the wall right next to it a big splattered splotch of vomit. All I could think was, hey, that person had one hell of a night. Let's turn to the spirituality corner for a minute. if you will. I go back and forth sometimes about how joyful I feel life should be and how much I should just accept that it won't be. It seems clear that there will certainly be difficult times. I think we all understand that now as adults. And that there will also be joyful times too. I hope most people have that experience. I know I do. I know I'm always going to try to return to joyful ones, and I will always look for ways of getting through the difficult ones. One way for me to get through difficult ones is remembering that I can always accept the situation. If I've done that and can do things, if I've done that all that I can do and things still feel difficult, I can start to feel a little bit powerless, which can lead to hopelessness. But one thing I remember I can always actively do, is to accept the situation. I can always accept. That in and of itself helps ease things a bit. I've also come to believe, and this comes from some of the near-death experiencers that I like and some other spiritual teachers. I've also come to believe that every bit of time on earth is valuable. Every bit of time in a body on earth, living in the material world, as maybe George Harrison would say, is a valuable experience. Some part of you, I think, your soul is what I would say, but you could call it your mind or your unconscious, even if that's not language that you like. Some part of you, I think, is benefiting and growing just by being a human on earth in a body moving through time. All right, so that's a little bit about the spirituality corner. Let's see here. Let's move on to the podcaster. I'm going to read you a little bit. We'll start with the first chapter, and we'll just dive right into it. If you like it, remember you can buy it on Amazon. $4.99 for the ebook, for those of you ebook readers, and $9.99 if you want the physical paperback. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 1, the podcaster. Folks, let's focus, said Carl. We're multitasking, replied a student. You can't do math and chat at the same time, Carl replied. He had made this speech, and nearly nothing other than this speech, during his time as a sub. It was an easy job at these fancy schools where children with serious behavioral problems did not stay very long. Carl had been subbing since the beginning of the school year, after his former school closed in August, leaving him unemployed. This was the second time in 2 years that his schools had closed, but this time he didn't have enough time to find a full-time job. Carl was fairly shocked when he got the news that his second school was closed. But once the shock wore off and the subbing routine started, he came to enjoy the free time he received, as the work didn't come every day. Carl had a podcast called, somewhat uninspiredly, the Carlcast, and the days off allowed him to work more on it. His elevator pitch for the show said, a middle-aged New Yorker talks about life in the Big Apple, gives his hot takes, and tries to be funny. He had a few listeners from among his friends and family, but he had nowhere near enough to make it a career. Soon enough, the class quieted down, and Carl got back to perusing Leaves of Grass. It was a luxury, he knew, to be able to read during work, and he was grateful for it. But he found it kind of hard to decipher possible meanings of work as metaphorical as Whitman's poetry, and keep an eye on the students. He'd never been much for poetry, finding much of it, especially what was included in the canonical work taught in school, to be too esoteric. He was drawn to the magical, imaginative, colorful, and free use of language in poetry, however, and wanted to give it another try. He thought he could do poetry segments on the podcast where he could sample famous or notable works and see if he could offer analysis or some reflection about his experience of reading the work. Adding a poetry segment would be another change to the show. He had recently added interviews to bring what he termed the, quote, universe of another person, end quote, into the, quote, universe of the show, end quote. He interviewed friends on aspects of their lives he found notable or intriguing. One interview was about how a friend experienced his talent. Others covered friends' experiences of creativity. The previous episodes were just him speaking. As the elevator pitch indicated, he told stories and told jokes, but he also had read small essays he had written and given his reflections as well. He added interviews as he felt that he was starting to repeat himself, and because he was truly interested in how other people experienced the topics they discussed. He also wanted to see if he could strike some veins that would make the podcast popular. While he was well aware of how few creative ventures supported careers, he believed we all had a purpose on Earth, and he was hoping doing the podcast might be his. He had taught for the previous 7 years and preferred it to his work with corporate digital teams, but he had not found it as fulfilling as he hoped he would. He didn't regret teaching and was glad he made the change, but in his heart of hearts, he wanted to do something creative, especially involving comedy. He had tried stand-up, had a few open mic nights in Manhattan, but didn't experience a great deal of success. In his first 2 outings, the audience was made up of aspiring stand-up comics. They were an extremely difficult crowd, and he endured near total silence throughout his 5-minute sets. In this third and final outing, the audience included friends of the comics, and the set went better, but it was a modest response. It wasn't just the response that made him second-guess the format of stand-up. It seemed too limited to straightforward jokes and didn't seem to allow much world building or character development. That is to say nothing of allowing for content that wasn't humorous. There had been some comics who had broken the traditional stand-up mold, but he wasn't sure he'd be able to do something similar without having a noteworthy name in that world. Then one day, while lying sick in bed with COVID, he had an unusual experience. He had come across the podcast by a man who'd made some funny videos related to hockey players. He was a big hockey player and fan, and looked forward to the videos every year. The man's podcast was unlike any he had ever heard. The man just told stories and gave his takes on things. Everything was humorous and lighthearted, and notably, the episodes didn't have themes. The man just jumped from bit to bit, almost aggressively avoiding segues. It was kind of like hanging out with a funny friend. A big difference from other podcasts, though, was that this one was focused. It wasn't just one person trying to think of things to talk about or a group of people shooting the shit. If it wasn't completely scripted, there was some preparation. It wasn't, however, a heavily researched show. Most of the other podcasts he listened to were one or the other, either a research journalistic or academic discussion, usually on the same general topic, or people conversing extemporaneously, also usually on some general topic. Carl loved the show, and he thought his format would be perfect for him. He could do comedy, but in a more conversational way than stand-up, and he could mix in essays and thoughts on language, fashion, and philosophical and spiritual topics, subjects that held great interest to him. He thought it, too, would be like hanging out with a good, funny friend, but would be more of a full conversation. It would be like a balanced meal, instead of just the dessert of comedy. So in his 5th year of teaching and his first as the lead teacher, Carl started this podcast. He got mixed feedback from his friends and family. Some really couldn't understand why he wouldn't choose a single topic like most podcasts, and some weren't really fans of podcasts in general. It was probably unlikely the latter would ever like such an unconventional one. Some, his dad in particular, really liked it. So he pushed on, joking that at around 30 minutes an episode, it may just turn out to be a series of the world's longest voicemails from a son to a father. After the initial round of feedback, he launched the podcast, dropping his first 3 episodes at once. He made an announcement complete with the elevator pitch to his roughly 850 social media connections. It got a better response than most of his social media posts. Over 50 people reacted, and he took that as positive feedback. He also started to receive messages from among his social media contacts saying lovely things about the show. Those that reached out comprised a unique group ranging from a free-spirited and artistic friend of the family to a somewhat conservative businessman that had been a friend in high school. This group sent him messages throughout the first and second seasons and even rekindled some of the friendships. The ongoing dialogue about the show, online and in person, gave him a lot of motivation. Others, perhaps with his taste for the skip-around format and topics under discussion, or perhaps with an appreciation of his humor, loved the show. That was really all he needed at first. He wished his listeners included people he didn't know, and it was possible he had a few strangers among that mix, but he was grateful he had a listenership at all. He loved that it was a group from different walks of life and with seemingly different sensibilities. He also loved that he hadn't spoken to most of this group for a long time. It proved to him that it wasn't just his current friends that wanted to hear the show. He reasoned that none of this group of fans were listening just to be nice or avoid awkward interactions. He would never have interacted with most of them if they hadn't reached out first. Buoyed by the fact that he had some audience, modest though it was, soon his thoughts turned to his long-held dream of doing something creative as his job. He prayed that the podcast would go viral. Given the fact that he found some audience and that it was his greatest dream, he thought perhaps he'd done the brave thing so many spiritual and self-help authors had urged and really followed his heart. He could see in his mind's eye a line graph of downloads and listeners suddenly skyrocketing, and graphics of such numbers wildly climbing as seen in so many movies. He did see the numbers spike from time to time, but they proved to be isolated incidents, and the number of downloads and listeners never reached a level to support a career. He did a little research about entrepreneurship and monetizing podcasts, and soon came upon what looked like the most reasonable path to make it his career. He didn't have enough listeners to run ads, and so the only way he could see to make enough money would be to get a dedicated listenership, or to make donations, or subscribe. One entrepreneur made the point that if you got 1,000 people to pay $100, that would equal $100,000, which would be plenty for Carl. He wasn't near having 1,000 people, let alone 1,000 that would give him $100 each, but it seemed to be a somewhat feasible goal. After 3 years of posting to his social media, however, he would need some other way to boost his number. One of the videos he had watched about promoting podcasts suggested interviewing celebrities and other people with large social media followings. The idea was they would post the interview on their own social media, and that would expose a lot of people to the interviewer's podcast. Carl tried that and had no success. Most of the authors and speakers he invited did not respond. The one that did told him to try again when his audience was bigger. It felt like a bit of a catch-22. He needed a big audience to get famous people on the show, but he needed the famous people on the show to get a big audience. The tactic went nowhere. He wondered how on earth he could get the thing to grow. He didn't have a big budget to spend on advertising or marketing, and he certainly wasn't famous. He did know someone who was, though. He became friendly with Martin Berenson, a somewhat past his prime movie star. They met playing hockey, and while they didn't hang out too much, Carl had been to his country house to play the game and had hung out with him at a bar one night. Martin had been in a number of enormous hits in the 1990s and even won an Oscar for Best Actor. He was also pretty involved with progressive politics, which kept his profile and his social media numbers fairly high. Carl wondered, how could he get Martin to boost his podcast? Should he interview him? He had been doing interviews and could always revisit the theme of creativity in an interview with Martin. That wouldn't really allow Carl to show off his comedic or writing chops, though. Plus, he had a friend who had a podcast on basketball, and this friend was able to get a notable guy on his show. The well-known person posted the episode on his social media, and the number of downloads was way higher than his friend's other episodes, but the numbers went right back to where they had been when he released his next episodes. He needed to think of something else. Maybe he could co-write a screenplay with Martin. Martin had been in a few funny movies and clearly had an appreciation for comedy, but there was one small problem. Carl had never written a screenplay. It might be a wonderful thing to try someday, but Carl felt that he couldn't possibly blow his one chance at exploiting this friendship by suggesting something so stupid. What he really wanted was for Martin to hype up his podcast over and over again. That seemed like a huge ask, and Carl thought there was no way Martin would do it. Unless Carl could offer him something in return. He racked his brain. What could he offer him? Carl was great at breaking the ice with strangers. He once had an idea for a business where he'd teach introverted people how to talk to members of the opposite sex and help salespeople meet new people. He'd even gone so far as to bring one of the hockey guys over as a kind of test case. It went okay, but he wasn't really sure the business would work, and more importantly, he didn't really want to do it. But that was all beside the point, Carl thought. Martin was famous, and though a bit quiet, he probably didn't need any help meeting women, or anyone for that matter. Carl thought about giving him hockey lessons. Carl was one of the better players in his group and had coached beginners, but he had to quit due to an injury when he was 15, and thus didn't really have any formal bona fides, such as an ex-pro would have. Plus, Martin was getting older and slower and probably didn't harbor dreams of really tearing it up at the rink. Then the script flipped a bit. What if he wouldn't give Martin anything, but rather save him from something? In short, what if he blackmailed him? He didn't like the idea and had never blackmailed anyone before. Hell, he felt bad if he thought someone had taken a joke the wrong way and had their feelings hurt. But he desperately wanted to do something creative for a career, and he could think of no other way to do it. He took some time to think about it, and then he decided he would blackmail Martin, and the ransom would be for Martin to rave about his podcast and post links to episodes on his social media. That's chapter 1, friends. I hope you guys enjoyed it. You can get the book at Amazon. Just search for The Podcaster Book or The Podcaster Patrick Brooks. That's it for this week. That's it for this episode of Patty Pod. Hope everyone's doing well. I will post the link to the book in the show notes, and I will catch you guys soon. I'm working on an interview with a pretty notable artist. He's showing at the Venice Biennale, one of the most prestigious art shows or exhibitions in the world. So he's a little busy right now, but after that show is up, we're going to have a time to chat. So we'll look forward to that. I'm also working on an interview with another friend who knows who he is out there in another continent. You know who you are. Hopefully you'll listen to this and you'll get back to me somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa, if you know what I'm saying. And we'll have a chat with him about his adventurous life. Okay, that's coming up. Hope you guys are doing well and having a good Sunday and having a good spring. Peace and love.